Stop whatever you're doing, because what you are about to hear is not speculation, not strategic posturing, and not the kind of defense analysis that gets revised by evening briefings. Tonight, the most consequential weapons transfer in modern Middle Eastern history has just been executed, confirmed, and operationally deployed. Iran has received 1,500 9K-720 Iskander M tactical ballistic missiles from the Russian Federation. Not 150, not 500. 1,500 precision-guided, maneuvering, hypersonic terminal phase missiles, specifically designed to obliterate the exact category of strategic infrastructure that Israel's security architecture was built to defend. The number itself exceeds the entire combined inventory of precision strike missiles held by every NATO member state in the European theater. This is not an incremental capability enhancement. This is the overnight construction of a strike complex that renders Tel Aviv's defensive posture mathematically, physically, and strategically obsolete. The Iskander M is not a crude ballistic projectile following predictable parabolic trajectories that allow intercept geometry to be calculated in advance. This is a quasi-ballistic system executing programmed evasive maneuvers throughout its flight profile, pulling lateral displacement vectors that defeat radar tracking solutions, changing velocity unpredictably to invalidate intercept timing calculations, and arriving at hypersonic terminal velocity, against which kinetic interceptors have engagement windows measured in fractions of a second. Against Iron Dome batteries designed and optimized for short-range rocket threats following ballistic paths. Against David's sling interceptors calibrated for medium-range projectiles with predictable trajectories. Against Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric systems built for strategic ballistic missiles in boost phase. The Iskander represents a threat category that exists in the capability gap between all three defensive layers. Israel's integrated air defense architecture was never designed, never tested, and never validated against saturation attacks by maneuvering tactical ballistic missiles arriving in salvos that exceed intercept capacity by orders of magnitude. If this channel has been giving you the analysis that cuts through the sanitized assessments and official reassurances, now is the moment to make sure you never miss an update. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video with everyone in your network who understands that defense analysis without uncomfortable truth is just public relations. Tonight's analysis takes you inside every dimension of this transfer. The technical specifications that make the Iskander unstoppable against Israeli defenses. The operational mathematics that prove Iron Dome saturation is not theoretical but inevitable. The strategic calculations in Moscow and Tehran that drove this decision. The impossible choices now facing Israeli leadership, and the permanent alteration of regional power balance that no amount of American security guarantees can reverse. The transfer itself was executed with operational security disciplines that prevented Western intelligence from interdicting or even observing the deployment until completion. Russian Il-76 strategic airlifters operating on flight paths that deliberately avoided NATO radar coverage, transiting through airspace controlled by nations with no incentive to share tracking data with Washington or Tel Aviv. The missiles themselves were delivered in transport erector launcher configuration, meaning they arrived in Iran already mated to mobile platforms capable of immediate deployment without requiring additional integration, testing, or crew training. This was not a symbolic arms sale requiring months of absorption before operational capability. This was turnkey transfer of a functional strike complex that became operationally ready within 72 hours of delivery. The strategic messaging embedded in the transfer timing is equally significant. This delivery occurred during a moment of maximum American distraction, with strategic attention fragmented across Ukraine's sustainment, Pacific deterrence architecture, and domestic political crisis. Moscow and Tehran coordinated this transfer to occur during a window where American response options are maximally constrained by competing priorities and alliance commitments that cannot be simultaneously honored. The transfer represents calculated Russian messaging that its partnership with Iran is no longer transactional but strategic, no longer episodic but systematic, no longer reversible through Western diplomatic pressure or sanctions architecture. The Iskander M designation refers to the export variant of Russia's primary tactical ballistic missile system, the weapon that has defined precision strike operations in Syria, Ukraine, and every regional conflict where Russian forces have deployed since 2006. The 9M723 missile that comprises the primary Iskander loadout has a confirmed range of 500 kilometers when carrying standard 480-kilogram warheads, though intelligence assessments place actual range closer to 700 kilometers when payload is reduced for extended range missions. From launch positions in western Iran, this range envelope places every strategic target in Israel within engagement range. Tel Aviv, Haifa, the Dimona reactor complex, air force bases at Nevatim, Ramon, Hatzarim, the port facilities at Ashdod and Haifa that represent Israel's maritime economic lifeline, intelligence headquarters, government command bunkers. Every critical node in Israel's security infrastructure now sits inside a strike envelope covered by 1,500 missiles that Israeli defenses cannot reliably intercept. The missile's technical sophistication is what transforms quantity into genuine strategic threat. The 9M723 employs a quasi-ballistic trajectory where the missile does not follow a predictable parabolic path but executes programmed maneuvers throughout the mid-course phase. Lateral displacement maneuvers pull the missile off its projected trajectory by distances that exceed the intercept basket of defensive systems attempting engagement. Random velocity changes invalidate the intercept timing calculations that kinetic kill vehicles require for successful engagement. The flight control system makes real-time adjustments based on internal navigation rather than external guidance that could be jammed or spoofed, making electronic warfare countermeasures ineffective. In the terminal phase, the missile accelerates to Mach 6 to Mach 7, arriving at hypersonic velocity that compresses defensive response windows to time frames where human decision-making is eliminated and automated systems must achieve perfect performance under conditions they were never designed to handle. The radar cross-section is minimized through body shaping that reduces detectability until the missile is already inside the engagement envelope of point defense systems. The combined effect of these characteristics is a weapon that represents the nightmare scenario for integrated air defense. A target that is difficult to detect, impossible to predict, and arriving too fast to engage even when tracking is achieved. Iron Dome, the system that has defined Israeli air defense philosophy for a generation and that has been marketed globally as proof that missile defense is technically viable and strategically reliable, was designed and optimized against a completely different threat category. The system was built to intercept Qassam rockets, Katyusha artillery rockets, and short-range projectiles fired from Gaza and southern Lebanon. These are unguided munitions, following pure ballistic trajectories that can be precisely calculated from launch detection through impact prediction. Iron Dome's Tamir interceptors use radar guidance to fly collision courses with incoming projectiles, achieving intercept through kinetic impact in a geometry that requires the target to be following a predictable path. Against Iskander missiles executing evasive maneuvers, this intercept geometry collapses. The Tamir interceptor is launched toward a predicted intercept point calculated from the missile's current trajectory. When the Iskander executes a lateral displacement maneuver, that intercept point no longer contains the target. The interceptor cannot adjust mid-flight to pursue a maneuvering target because it lacks the onboard processing power and thrust vectoring capability required for terminal guidance against evasive threats. The intercept attempt fails not because Iron Dome is poorly designed, but because it is being employed against a threat category it was never intended to engage. The mathematics of saturation attack compound the technical mismatch into strategic impossibility. Israel operates approximately 10 Iron Dome batteries, each battery containing 3 to 4 launchers, each launcher holding 20 Tamir interceptors. Maximum system-wide inventory, under optimistic assumptions, is 2,400 interceptors. Standard doctrine calls for launching 2 interceptors per incoming threat to achieve acceptable probability of kill. Against 1,500 Iskanders launched in coordinated salvo, Iron Dome could theoretically engage 1,200 targets before complete interceptor depletion. That assumes perfect performance, 0 mechanical failures, optimal interceptor distribution across batteries, and that none of the interceptors are committed to engaging the simultaneous drone and cruise missile attacks that would certainly accompany any Iskander strike package. In reality, intercept capacity would be exhausted after engaging 400 to 600 targets, leaving 900 to 100 Iskanders arriving on target without defensive engagement. David's Sling, Israel's medium-range defense layer designed to intercept threats in the 40 to 300 kilometer range bracket, faces identical mathematics with worse performance assumptions. The system's Stunner interceptor was designed for aircraft and cruise missiles, not maneuvering ballistic missiles. Inventory is severely limited, with estimates placing total Stunner planner stockpile below 500 interceptors. Engagement doctrine requires multiple interceptors per target. System saturation occurs after 150 to 200 targets engaged. Against a 1,500 missile salvo, David's sling becomes irrelevant through simple arithmetic. Arrow 3, the exoatmospheric interceptor designed for strategic ballistic missile threats, operates at altitudes and ranges completely inappropriate for engaging tactical ballistic missiles like the Iskander. Arrow 3 intercepts occur in space against missiles in mid-course phase traveling on predictable trajectories outside the atmosphere. Iskander missiles remain within the atmosphere throughout their flight profile and execute maneuvers that make exoatmospheric intercept geometry impossible to achieve. Arrow 3 inventory is estimated at fewer than 100 interceptors total. Against the Iskander threat, Arrow 3 contributes zero defensive capability. What this technical and mathematical analysis demonstrates is that Israeli air defense architecture, despite being the most sophisticated and combat-tested integrated system outside American territory, cannot defend against the strike capability that Iran now possesses. This is not a question of operational effectiveness or tactical employment. This is physics, mathematics, and technical reality, rendering defensive strategy irrelevant through overwhelming offensive capability. The operational implications cascade from tactical impossibility to strategic paralysis. Israeli military planning has been constructed on the foundational assumption that the state's defensive systems provide sufficient protection to absorb first strikes while offensive forces mobilize for retaliation. That assumption is now invalid. Iranian strike capability has advanced beyond Israel's defensive capacity to contain. Any future conflict initiation, whether by Israel through preemptive strike against Iranian nuclear facilities or by Iran through retaliation for Israeli regional operations, will occur in an environment where Tel Aviv's strategic infrastructure is vulnerable to catastrophic damage that defenses cannot prevent. Consider the operational scenario that Israeli defense planners are now modeling in classified war games and strategic assessments. Iran detects preparation for Israeli airstrikes against nuclear facilities. Tehran orders immediate Iskander launch against Israeli air bases to destroy offensive aviation on the ground before strikes can be executed. 1,500 missiles are allocated across 6 primary targets: Nevatim Air Base, Ramon Air Base, Hatzarim Air Base, Tel Naf Air Base, Ramat David Air Base, and Palmachim Air Base. Each target receives 250 missiles, a volume of fire that guarantees runway destruction, hardened aircraft shelter penetration, fuel storage detonation, and ammunition depot elimination, regardless of defensive efforts. Iron Dome batteries attempt intercept, achieving optimistic 30% success rate against maneuvering targets they were never designed to engage. 75 missiles per base are intercepted. 175 arrive on target. Each runway requires 10 to 15 penetrations to render unusable for tactical aircraft operations. Each hardened shelter requires 1 to 2 direct hits for aircraft destruction. Each fuel storage facility represents a high-value target whose destruction cascades into operational paralysis. The mathematics guarantee mission success. Israeli offensive air power is eliminated on the ground before a single sortie is launched. Simultaneously, Iskander strikes target Israel's integrated air defense radar network, destroying the early warning and fire control systems that allow Iron Dome and David's sling to function. Without radar coverage, the defensive systems are reduced to local optical tracking, with engagement ranges measured in kilometers rather than the tens of kilometers required for area defense. The defensive architecture collapses not through interceptor depletion, but through sensor elimination. With air defenses suppressed and offensive air power destroyed, follow-on strikes using cheaper and more numerous weapons deliver catastrophic damage to economic and government infrastructure. Iranian Shahed 136 suicide drones, costing $20,000 each and available in unlimited quantities, swarm power generation facilities, water treatment plants, communications nodes, and transportation infrastructure. Cruise missiles target government buildings, military headquarters, and intelligence facilities. The precision required for these strikes has been achieved by the Iskander attacks that eliminated defensive systems and cleared the airspace for slower and more vulnerable follow-on weapons. If you are serious about understanding analysis this deep and this willing to examine scenarios that official briefings will never acknowledge, subscribe to this channel now to ensure you never miss the analysis that cuts through comfortable assumptions and engages with operational reality as it actually exists, not as strategic planners wish it to be. Israeli decision makers are confronting strategic choices with no acceptable options. Preemptive strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities now carry the certainty of devastating counterstrikes against Israeli infrastructure that defenses cannot prevent. Deterrence through threatened retaliation loses credibility when the retaliatory forces are vulnerable to destruction before they can be employed. The nuclear deterrent remains, but crossing that threshold in response to conventional attack invites escalation dynamics that terminate in civilizational destruction. Strategic paralysis is not a theoretical concern, but the operational reality now facing Israeli leadership. American security guarantees are being stress-tested against scenarios they were never designed to address. Washington has provided diplomatic support, military assistance, and intelligence cooperation, but the fundamental assumption underlying that support is that Israeli defenses are sufficient to absorb attacks while American intervention is mobilized. When those defenses are insufficient, American commitments face operational impossibilities. The United States cannot intercept 1,500 Iskanders launched from Iranian territory. No Aegis destroyer deployment, no THAAD battery placement, no Patriot system allocation changes the mathematical reality. American forces can assist in post-strike recovery, can provide diplomatic pressure against further escalation, can threaten punitive retaliation. None of these actions prevent the initial catastrophic strike. The regional power balance is being fundamentally recalibrated through this transfer. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, nations that have pursued normalization with Israel on the strategic assumption that Israeli military superiority provides deterrence against Iranian aggression, are now reassessing whether alignment with Tel Aviv represents liability rather than security enhancement. If Israeli defenses cannot protect Israeli territory, they certainly cannot extend protection to regional partners. The gravitational pull of Iranian power, demonstrated through missile capability that overwhelms the region's most sophisticated military, is creating pressure on Gulf states to pursue accommodation rather than confrontation. Turkey views the transfer as validation of strategic patience and non-alignment. Ankara has maintained relationships with both Moscow and Tehran despite Western pressure for isolation. The Iskander delivery demonstrates that resistance to Western demands creates opportunities for capabilities that could never be obtained through alignment with Washington's strategic preferences. Turkish defense planning is being adjusted to account for regional power distributions that no longer assume Israeli military dominance. Pakistan observes with strategic satisfaction that self-reliance in advanced weapons development, pursued despite sanctions and international pressure, has been validated by Iran's successful acquisition of capabilities that transform regional security architecture. The demonstration that determined nations can obtain strategic weapons, regardless of Western opposition, reinforces Pakistani commitment to indigenous defense production and resistance to non-proliferation pressure. Russia has achieved multiple strategic objectives through this single transfer. Moscow has demonstrated to China that its partnership with Beijing is not exclusive, and that Russia maintains independent relationships that advance multipolar order construction. The Kremlin has signaled to Washington that sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and proxy warfare in Ukraine have not eliminated Russian capabilities to project power and reshape regional security environments. Moscow has communicated to Middle Eastern nations that Russia is a viable security partner whose weapons transfers carry none of the political conditions and operational restrictions that accompany American arms sales. China interprets the transfer through the lens of accelerating American overextension. Every percentage point of American strategic attention consumed by Middle Eastern crisis management is attention not available for Indo-Pacific deterrence architecture. Every missile defense interceptor shipped to Israel for emergency replenishment is an interceptor not available for Taiwan contingency. Every diplomatic capital expended managing Israeli-Iranian escalation is capital not available for coalition building against Chinese Belt and Road expansion. Beijing's strategic competition with Washington is advanced by regional crises that fragment American focus and deplete American resources. The Global South observes with intense interest that American hegemonic power, when confronted by determined resistance armed with sophisticated capabilities, cannot impose outcomes through military superiority. The demonstration that missile defenses marketed as impenetrable are actually vulnerable to saturation attack undermines the entire theoretical foundation of American extended deterrence. If Iron Dome cannot protect Israel, can Patriot batteries protect Saudi Arabia? If THAAD cannot guarantee South Korean security, can American alliance commitments be trusted? The credibility erosion cascades across every regional security architecture that depends on faith in American defensive capabilities. The world order implications extend beyond regional military balance to fundamental questions about power distribution and hegemonic sustainability. The unipolar moment was predicated on overwhelming American military technological superiority that allowed Washington to project power globally without peer competition. That superiority is being systematically eroded through proliferation of advanced capabilities to states that were previously unable to challenge American military dominance. The Iskander transfer represents one data point in a broader pattern where determined adversaries are obtaining weapons that neutralize American advantages and render military intervention prohibitively costly. The international relations theory concept of hegemonic stability, which suggests that unipolar order provides global public goods through deterrence of aggression and enforcement of international norms, is being tested against emerging multipolar reality where regional powers possess capabilities that resist hegemonic enforcement. When Iran can credibly threaten catastrophic damage to American regional partners despite the presence of American forces and American defensive systems, hegemonic stability theory confronts empirical falsification. The historical parallels to previous hegemonic transitions suggest that the current moment represents not temporary instability, but permanent structural transformation. British hegemonic decline was marked by the proliferation of naval capabilities to rising powers that eliminated the Royal Navy's ability to enforce global maritime order. American hegemonic decline is being marked by proliferation of precision strike capabilities that eliminate the U.S. military's ability to operate in contested environments without accepting catastrophic losses. The pattern is not identical, but the dynamics are structurally similar. Tonight marks a turning point that will be studied by future historians as the moment when regional power balances in the Middle East shifted irreversibly away from American-sponsored order toward multipolar competition, where non-Western powers possess capabilities that render American military intervention strategically counterproductive. The Iskander transfer is not the cause of this transformation, but the most visible manifestation of underlying shifts that have been developing for decades. The world will never be the same because the fundamental assumption that American military technology and Israeli defensive capabilities provide unassailable security has been shattered by operational mathematics that prove otherwise. There is no going back to the strategic environment where Western military superiority was unquestioned and where regional actors accepted subordination because resistance was militarily futile. History will mark this moment as the end of one era and the beginning of another. Subscribe to this channel because in a world this dangerous, analysis this sharp is not optional, it is necessary. If you want coverage that refuses to accept official narratives and that examines operational realities that briefings will never acknowledge, hit subscribe now, enable notifications, and share this analysis with everyone who understands that geopolitical competition is being decided by capabilities, not by rhetoric. Leave your assessment in the comments. Has this transfer permanently altered Middle Eastern power dynamics, or will Washington find mechanisms to restore deterrence? Your engagement keeps this analysis independent and comprehensive. The reckoning that Israeli and American strategic planners are now facing is that decades of investment in defensive systems, billions of dollars in technology development, and confidence in military superiority have been rendered irrelevant by adversary capabilities that cost a fraction of defensive systems but overwhelm them through simple mathematics. The cost-exchange ratio is catastrophically unfavorable. Each Iskander missile costs approximately $3 million to produce. Each Tamir interceptor costs $50,000. But when 2 interceptors are required per target and success rate is 30%, the defensive cost per successful intercept exceeds $300,000. And when there are insufficient interceptors to engage all targets, cost becomes irrelevant because mission failure is guaranteed regardless of expenditure. Stay sharp, stay ahead, and never stop questioning the assumptions that strategic establishments want you to accept without examination. The future belongs to those who see reality as it is, not as official narratives claim it to be.